Okay.
But you will ask me these questions.
I will. Okay. Today is November 22nd, 2013. And I'm here in Cedar Falls, Iowa with Harriet Hahn, who taught in rural school and attended rural school. And I am Jean Richardson. Harriet, thank you so much for doing this for the University Museums. We do appreciate it.
Well, you know, it's a pleasure to go back in memory.
Okay, very
Yes.
good. Where and when did you attend country school?
I attended country school in the 30s at Allison, Iowa, and it was Ripley Township, number 2.
Were you in that school the whole time?
Yes, I was in that one building. We lived on the farm, and it was about a half a mile from where we lived.
Did you go to kindergarten too, or did you start first grade?
You know, I'm really not sure about that. I think there was kindergarten, and I went from kindergarten through 8th grade in this one building.
Do you remember any of the tasks that you had to perform before you went to school in the morning?
No, I don't think I did very much. I think we just had breakfast and got ready and went to school.
Do you remember what you wore?
We wore dresses mainly, except during the last couple years I remember wearing kind of an overall. It was a striped one, I remember that.
Do you remember how your winter clothing differed?
Well, we had heavier clothing, of course, and heavier coats and boots, because many times we'd have to walk. We generally walked and had to trudge through snow and ice, you know.
What time did you leave for school?
Probably after 8:30 in the morning, I'd say. It started about 9.
And you said you walked to school, generally. Did you get a ride sometimes?
Well, if the snow was too deep, Dad would hitch the team to the sleigh, and he would take us to school with the sleigh. And I remember there was straw in the sleigh, and Mother had blankets, and I remember how wrapped up Dad was, because that wind was terrible and the snow would be blowing, you know.
Did you have bells so you could sing Jingle Bells?
Not usually.
Did you have anybody else to walk or ride with?
Well, my 2 sisters went to this school too.
Were they older?
No, they were younger.
Do you remember anything about those walks? Do you remember any things you saw or you heard?
Well, you know, Mother always made us wear long underwear, and oh, I detested that. And we lived in the field quite a ways, and we'd get to the end of the driveway, and of course Mom couldn't see us then, and we'd roll those underwear legs up so they wouldn't show, you know, because we were kind of embarrassed to have that wad down at the bottom under our stockings.
You don't think the other girls had to wear it too?
Yeah, beg pardon.
You don't think the other girls were wearing long underwear?
Oh,
too?
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you
Yes.
got over.
Yeah, everybody was wearing it. You had to have it on to keep warm.
Do you remember anything else about those walks?
Well, when the weather got nice, it was really pleasant. You know, the birds were singing, and I remember flowers wildflowers blooming and the smell of the earth and the grass. So that was kind of interesting.
Please describe your schoolhouse and its surroundings.
Well, from what I understand, it was an acre. Each school, rural school, sat about in the middle of an acre, and it was more or less kind of a, seems to me, a square building, and it had a main entryway and on each side of the entryway there was a room, and one was the girls' room and one was the boys', and in those rooms the kids kept their lunch pails and their coats and boots and hats and caps and whatever. And then you went into the main building. They were usually painted white, I remember correctly, and there were rows of desks from small to larger because we had little people, and then we had almost young men, you know, and they were tacked on strips, not tacked, or screwed down on strips of boards. And that made it kind of difficult for cleaning, but you did the best you could, you know. And we had a big stove that had a metal kind of jacket around it. And it was fired with, starting the fire with cobs and then coal. Always used coal. And all those, the old building was cold in the morning lots of times, and especially in the beginning of the week, you know, because it sat empty Saturday and Sunday. And we had, I remember, kind of a bookshelf. Probably had 4 shelves, and that was our library. So we did not have many books, just a few, and they were well used. Had teacher's desk and blackboard, which was slate. That was a good blackboard we had there. And had a piano and Victrola. And many times, especially in the wintertime, the teacher would put a big pan of water on the stove, and if the kids brought some kind of food in a jar of some kind, she would set those jars in that water so we would have something warm for lunch. I remember that, and that tasted pretty good. I don't know what
So
else.
on the walls, you can see blackboards.
Yes.
Windows on 2 sides.
Yes, windows on 2 sides.
Electricity.
No. But it seemed, we had pretty good light, even without electricity. Except in the corners, you know.
A flag.
Oh, yes. We always had the flag. And that was one of the first things we did in the morning, was give the salute and pledge to the flag.
Do you remember any pictures on the wall? Would there have been George Washington?
George Washington and Lincoln, yes.
Did you have any kerosene lamps or anything for darker days?
I think there were some, but we never used those while I went to school.
How about the school on the outside? Any playground equipment?
Well, the school was white, painted white, and very little playground equipment. We played games, Pump Away, and Red Rover. King of the Hills, I think that we made that up ourselves and had fun with that. And we did have a baseball bat and a ball. But otherwise, there wasn't any.
No teeter-totters or
Nothing,
swings?
not in this school.
A flagpole?
Yes,
Whose job was it to put the flag out?
the teacher always did.
Couple of outhouses?
Yes, and a coal house, where coal was dumped, and a few cobs start the fire with, and that was always the teacher's job.
Do you remember any trees on the school grounds?
Yes, there were some trees, so we had a little shade. When school started, it was always hot.
Do you remember what time of year you started school?
We usually started in August.
Were you done before Memorial Day?
Yes, we were done early.
Did you go between Christmas and New Year's?
Yes. We'd have Thanksgiving Day off, and maybe the day after, and of course Christmas.
But not the whole week off for
No.
Christmas?
No.
So did you have any time to play outside before you started school in the morning, or did you go right inside?
It depended on the weather. Yeah. If the weather was good, wasn't raining or snowing, well,
Did your school have a basement?
yes.
What did you do with the basement?
It wasn't usable.
Oh. So you've gone into the building.
Yes.
What do you do first? Would you
We
walk in?
usually had some opening exercises, we called them,
Okay.
and usually singing, and with a Victrola, and I played the piano when I was teaching, of course.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So then we used that. Then, of course, if the weather was bad, we'd have recess and we'd have games inside. Like fruit basket upset, we often played that.
Did the
And-
older boys seem to enjoy that, do you think? And older girls
Would they what?
enjoy those kinds of games?
Yes. They liked that. They really liked that. And sometimes the older boys would have to help take in the crops in the fall. So they'd miss quite a little.
Do you remember providing any items yourselves? Pencils or
No, I don't remember that. I don't think we did.
Crayons or paper?
We had our own crayons.
Own crayons?
Yeah, pencil and paper, and we had to buy our own books.
And where did you go to get those?
You know, I was thinking and thinking about that. And I don't just recall where we went, but we had new books. Boy, that was a treasure to get new textbooks, you know, because they smelled so good and so new, and no one else had used them, and we enjoyed those.
So you've come in the building and you've got your opening exercises all done with.
Yes.
So then you're at your seats.
Yes.
And how does the day begin then?
Well, we'd start having our small groups. The teacher would call students to the front of the room, and there was either chairs or a recitation bench, and we would talk about the assignment that had been given the previous class, and we would ask questions about different things and talk about assignments for the next class.
Who was asking the questions, the teacher or the students?
The students and the teacher both.
Okay. Do you remember at all how the teacher would have organized the day's lessons? Who she would have worked with first?
You start with the little younger ones and work on up to the older kids. And each group would have an assignment and usually some paperwork or something they'd have to hand in, of course. Then the teacher had to check that over in her free time.
How did the day's experiences vary between the grade levels?
Well, for instance, the older ones would have history, and maybe they'd have history Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and maybe the first semester, and then the second semester they'd switch to Tuesday, Thursday, and the same way with all the other ones, because you couldn't have all the classes, because if you have 8 grades or 9, it isn't always saying that you'd have that many, because it varied on, you know, the student. But then you'd have spelling maybe a couple days a week. I think like math, you had that every day, and reading. But geography and history, I remember that you kind of staggered those.
Do you remember how many students were in your grade?
That varied from year to year too. Probably 15, 20
In the building.
in the building, yeah.
How about that were in your grade?
In the grade I was in.
Mhm. Were you alone, do you remember?
No, there were a couple others. I think there were, and that varied too because people moved in and out, you know. I think probably 3 or 4, it seems to me.
Do you remember any of the lessons?
I especially remember a science, of course, now I'm going back to when I was teaching. A science project we had. We took a large sheet of tagboard and I had the kids collect bark and a leaf from each tree that they came in contact with, and then we would find out the name of the tree, and we mounted that on that tagboard. I especially remember that. And I also remember, and this is when I was a student, we had to take 7th grade exams when we were in 7th grade.
Not 8th grade exam, but you had a 7th grade
7th
exam.
grade exams. I think there were 3 of them. And we had to go to the courthouse and take that. And then when we were in 8th grade, we had to take the rest of them. History and spelling and geography and government and math, and we called it arithmetic in those days. And we stayed after school, and the teacher drilled us, and I mean, she really did. So we were well prepared. I was going to dig those out. That I still have the results of those exams. Maybe I can find them after a bit.
Okay, that sounds great.
Yeah.
What were your favorite subjects, Harriet?
Oh, I liked history and I liked geography.
Do you know why?
Both of them very much.
What was your least favorite?
Science, probably.
Did you interact with the other students during your lessons at all?
As I was a student, yes, we did. We worked on some projects together. And sometimes we helped each other with arithmetic and spelling.
Did your teacher have any helpers?
No,
Do you remember any rules in the classroom?
well, you know, this teacher we had, she was real liberal kind of gal, but we still had, you know, no whispering, and you had to ask for permission, for instance, to work with another student or to go to the outhouse or to get a drink.
Do you remember any discipline techniques that your teacher used to enforce her rules?
I remember one young man, and he had a hard time learning, but I don't know what he did wrong, but I remember she whipped him.
What'd she use?
A little whip. I don't remember what he did wrong.
Was he
But-
just a real little tyke?
No, he was a big guy. He was a big kid. But that really impressed me.
Do you remember your procedures for going to the outhouse to get permission?
You just held up your hand. I don't know if it was one finger or 2 fingers. That gave you permission to do it. Then all she had to do was nod her head. And by the way, I had a man teacher the first couple of years. And then a lady down the road taught us. Probably 6, 7 years. And she was a good teacher.
Was the man a good teacher?
Oh, he was all right, but he was more interested in sports than he was in teaching. I remember he laid out a croquet, I don't know what you call it, on the grounds. He leveled it all off so we could play croquet. Wasn't very successful. I don't remember even playing it. Red Rover was a lot more fun.
How did you get the teacher's attention when you needed to ask a question?
You just raise your hand. And you know, if she was working with a group, you'd just be better off to wait until that class was dismissed.
How did you know it was time for lunch?
Well, we usually had lunch at 12 o'clock.
You talked about bringing your lunch in your pail.
Yes.
What would have been in your pail?
Well, we had sandwiches, usually.
Homemade bread?
Yes. And maybe some canned fruit. It was seldom that we'd have an apple or an orange, because we were so poor. My folks didn't have the money to buy stuff like that. And if we'd have pancakes in the morning and have some left over, we'd put a little butter and sugar on them and roll them up and use those for our lunch too. And sometimes we'd have pork and beans and cocoa that we'd heat on the stove. And those families that were more well-to-do, they'd have fruit and candy maybe.
Would you have had a cookie?
I could have had, yeah, we could have had a cookie.
Where did you eat your lunch?
In the schoolroom at our desk.
How did your, well, maybe you already answered this. The question is, how did your meals compare to those of other students? But you've already answered that for me, haven't you?
Yeah.
How long was lunchtime?
Well, we usually have a half hour at noon, so we could get out at 3:30. And that didn't give us much time to eat or to get out on the playground a few minutes, you know.
How did the country school day end?
Well, I think we just concluded with our classes and dismissed.
Do you remember any of your teachers' names?
Yes.
What were they?
The man that we had, his name was Ray Yost, and his son lives here in Cedar Falls. And the lady teacher we had was Genevieve Broquet.
Would you spell that for me?
Genevieve
I think I can get that. But the Broquet?
Broquet, B-R-O-C-K-A.
Oh, okay. Broquet. Well, how can you describe them to me? physically and?
These teachers?
Mhm.
Well, this man, he was a wrestler, and he had one of these, what they call cauliflower ears. Have you heard of that?
Mhm.
And he was quite a disciplinarian. Boy, he wanted the kids to mind, I remember that. And Genevieve lived probably a quarter of a mile from school. And I don't remember how she got there, but she was probably 5.5 foot tall and really quite a nice lady. Smiled a lot, but she wanted her kids to behave.
So you said that Miss or Mrs. Braca?
Mrs.
Mrs.
yeah.
Braca. And you said she lived 1/4 of a mile?
Yes, and her husband was a farmer, but also he did some barbering. I remember him cutting my hair.
Do you know where Ray Yost lived?
Yes, I remember where he lived, but that was a couple miles. Maybe 1.5 miles.
Did either of them live with farm families? Or did they have their own homes?
They had their own
You said Mrs.
home.
Braca.
Brochet had their own
Brochet.
home too, yes.
Okay, so they were both in their own home.
Yes.
Did you ever see your teachers outside of the school day?
Oh, sometimes, yes.
Where would you run into them?
At their home.
Oh, you call on them?
Well, we'd go out and get our hair cut, or they were neighbors, and you kind of neighbored.
Okay.
My parents were good friends of Mrs. Brochet and her husband, and so we kind of neighbored.
Did you have any responsibilities in the upkeep of the school classroom?
Well, the one thing the kids did was dust the erasers. We think that was a big thing. We'd get outside for a few minutes. Not a very pleasant job, but we didn't mind it. I don't think anything else, really.
Would you say the teacher did most of the work to take care of the schoolhouse?
Yes.
Did anyone ever help her?
Well, when I was teaching, my youngest sister was one of my students. And she would help me. And we would spread some, I don't know what it's called now, but something on the floor, and so that
They call that compound, sweeping
yeah,
compound.
compound of some kind, so the dust wouldn't rise up when you're sweeping, And she would help me with sweeping, and sometimes the kids would wash the blackboards. Because you did that every day, every night. But before school would start in the fall, the parents would come and wash windows and brush down cobwebs, and I don't know if they did any painting. They probably did. And sweep everything out and wash off desks and things like that.
Would you say your school had any extra supplies, any kind of media?
Just that piano and that Victrola, hand crank Victrola.
Did you have an 8th grade graduation ceremony?
Not at school, but we did county-wise.
Do you remember anything about that?
Yes,
Tell me.
yes. I was third highest in the county as far as grade point average was concerned. So I had to say the Mizpah poem. That was my contribution at that time.
Anything else about graduation you remember?
I know all the girls were in white.
So you remember your dress?
Yes, it was one my aunt made for me. And it was a mohair rayon dress. And I've got pictures.
Who attended graduation?
Parents.
Any aunts or uncles or siblings?
Siblings. I don't think aunts and uncles did. Because they would go when their own children graduated, you know.
Would there have been any part of the graduation ceremony that would have been more meaningful to you?
I think, the speeches that were given that day, I remember.
What did you do after you graduated from 8th grade?
I went to high school in Allison.
Do you remember any of the adjustment going from your little country school to the big high school in town?
Well, I always thought that the other kids thought they were a little better than we country school kids, you know. And that they were a little smarter. But I kind of showed them that country school kids weren't so dumb after all. And they were a little surprised.
Do you remember how community politics affecting the operation of the school at all?
I don't think it had a lot to do with it. But I know that when I was hired to teach this same school that I had attended all those years, that the board president told me that we want to give you a chance and start you out here as a teacher, and being I was one of them that had graduated from that school. So.
Were the parents or the community members involved with the school in any way?
Well, we had a big picnic at the end of the school year, and that was pretty well attended. And the kids played games and stuff. And I remember that there was a community play put on. Oh, Didn't It Rain was the name of it, and my dad was in it. And the community people from the community was in it. And also, church services were held there for a number of years.
Will you tell me the name of that play again that your dad was in?
Oh, Didn't It Rain?
Oh, Didn't It Rain?
Uh-huh.
did you do once you left school at the end of the day? Did you have chores to do?
Well, I helped a little bit at home, but usually there were so many papers to go over, and you always had to have lesson plans made in advance and get ready for, and of course you had to sweep that building, every day.
Did you ever have any homework?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about your homework.
Papers to correct.
Now, are you
And-
talking about when you were a teacher?
Yes,
Okay, as a teacher, you had papers to correct.
yes, papers to correct. And I remember a copy thing that we made. I don't know what it was called, but it had a gelatin base, and you heated that and poured it in this frame. And then you used certain carbon paper, like to make out tests or math problems or anything, and you typed those up or wrote them up with special pen and put that on that gelatin surface, and then you could take off maybe 6 or 8 copies, whatever you needed. So that was the copy machine we had. Pretty crude.
Do you remember as a child any local or national or international events that happened while you were attending rural school?
World War II.
What do you remember?
Well, my good friend he volunteered. And of course, a lot of the young people from the community and surrounding communities were drafted. And the man I married was gone almost 4 years. So that was pretty traumatic. They didn't talk about it too much, the kids. But it really affected the whole community. Because you were so anxious about all the happenings. And one of our young men was killed.
Were there any disasters in your community itself while you were in country school? Any tornadoes? Influenza?
Well, there was this depression, and it was pretty bad. People didn't have much, and we were all in the same boat. And then we had so many dry years and so many dust storms. But our family always had enough to eat. But we were poor.
You talked about the end of the school year picnic. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, all the parents, of course, were invited, and everybody brought food. And we shared, of course.
Okay, we've talked.
But then we just closed up the schoolhouse, locked the doors, you know, and I don't know that I had to turn in any reports anywhere because the county superintendent made several calls during the year to check on the lesson plans and how things were going in school. And I remember she was a pretty good sized lady, but she was always so pleasant, and she always told a story. And you know what story she told? Little Black Sambo. Of course, that was accepted then and sure wouldn't be now, but she was the best storyteller. We just loved her. And she'd have some good ideas to tell me, you know, when I was teaching, or compliment me on what I was doing. She was great.
What was your favorite part of the day?
Oh, I think maybe the opening part of the day with the music and starting the classes, and the kids loved that. We had fun with music.
What's the worst memory you have of Country Schoolhouse?
Oh, I don't know. I think things went pretty well, and I can't recall things not going so good. Probably, going back, I was teaching at Union 4 here in Blackhawk County, and we were playing baseball, and one of the kids really whacked that ball and hit me right here and broke my nose. That's the first time I ever saw stars in the daylight. But it knocked me down. And of course I had a bloody nose. And had to send the kids home and went to the doctor. Not much he could do for a broken nose, you know. And I think that probably was the worst thing.
I would guess so.
Yeah.
What lessons from country schools might we benefit from today?
Well, I think people really cared about each other. The students especially, talking about. And they wanted to see success, and they helped each other. Those that would be through with their lesson assignments could help some of the younger ones. And I think the younger ones learned from the older ones.
Could a one-room schoolhouse be successful today?
Well, if it had all the technology that kids are working with today, I don't know why it wouldn't be. But I don't think it would work because there's so much where all these smaller towns have gotten together and closed all their own schools and used a centralized school, and I think it's been done a lot for the sports end of it.
else we should know before we go into the teaching part? Anything else we should know about the students in one-room schoolhouses?
I don't know if I mentioned that the teacher would have to start the fire, She'd have to get in there earlier so that she could warm the place up. And I remember her hauling coal and stuff, and sometimes some of the older kids would go and get some, in a coal pail. But those old buildings were terribly cold and drafty. Nothing was insulated,
Well, how are you doing? Shall we tackle the teacher part today too?
Sure.
All right. I think you're doing wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Where and when did you teach country school?
I taught in the 40s. See, I went to Iowa State Teachers College for a summer, and I could teach. As soon as I got out of high school, I went to what is now UNI, and then I went for the summer and taught in the fall. And I taught for 6 years in different schools. But 4 years in Butler County and 2 years in Blackhawk County.
Were all 4 years in Butler County this Ripley Township number 2?
No.
Okay.
No, I had different schools.
Do you remember what they were?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a school by the name of McCachran, and I'm not sure how to spell it even now or what township it was in, but it was a couple miles from my home. And then I taught at Parkersburg, north of Parkersburg, in a rural school there.
Do you know the name or number of that one?
I don't recall
Okay.
the name of that.
Okay. And was that for the other 2 years then? But you said
I'm trying to think.
you've got 6
I'm
years.
not sure if I was 2 years at McCachran or at Parkersburg.
Okay.
I'm not sure. One of those two.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And then when you said you taught in Blackhawk County.
Yes. Union 4.
What were your room and board arrangements as a teacher?
I stayed with my folks and drove, except for one winter when I was teaching there north of Parkersburg. I stayed with a family that lived right across from the schoolhouse. So that was very convenient. Just had to walk across the road.
Um,
And
Did
paid
you-
some room and
you
board.
paid some room and board,
I don't
okay.
remember how much, but I know I
Okay.
paid some room and board there.
Do you remember what you wore as a teacher?
Dresses and I know I wore dresses or skirts and blouses. Never pants.
Did you still have to wear the long underwear?
No.
Let's go back to the room and board. Would the lady of the house fix your lunch then?
Yes. Yeah. And she fixed breakfast for me and of course evening meal.
Did you have any responsibilities with this family other than paying them? Or-
No.
Okay, so you were free pretty much to do your schoolwork.
Yeah.
Do you remember what time you would have left for school?
Probably about 8 o'clock, I'd say. Because I still had to get a fire going during the cold weather, cool weather.
What would the furthest distance from school have been?
Well, that was probably the furthest from where my parents lived, because that's where I stayed, probably 5-6 miles, I'd say.
Okay. When you were at Union Number 4 in Blackhawk County,
Yeah.
were you married then
Yes,
and living in this house then?
that house over there.
Oh, that house over there. Okay.
Yes.
So when you lived right across the school, you would have walked to school.
Yes,
When you went the 5 or 6 miles, you had your own car.
yes, yes.
Okay. Did you ever have any riders with you?
No.
Do you remember anything special about those trips?
I remember daylight savings came on. I think it's the very first time. And I was on this road, it was a familiar road, but it was so dark yet, and I drove right into the ditch. So I walked to a farmhouse, and I knew this couple that lived there. And they were still in bed. And I woke him up and I said, Ray, I'm in the ditch and I need a pull out. And he got up and got the tractor out and pulled me out of the ditch. And in the meantime, he lost his big lug chain. And it was weeks later that I found it under my feet, that it slid kind of back under there, you know. And I was so embarrassed. But that's the one thing that I remember about driving over there.
Were your schoolhouses, you would have taught in 3 different schoolhouses, any different from the one you attended school in?
No, they were all about
All
the
the
same.
same.
Yes, they were all about the same.
With the,
I remember McCachran had an organ instead of a piano. And I think the one by Parkersburg didn't have a piano. Then when I was in Parkersburg, we put on a community play, and I'm not sure what the name of that one was. You'd think I'd remember that, wouldn't you? But we put on a community play, and that was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun with that.
as the teacher, were you more or less in charge of
Yes,
that play?
yes.
What kinds of things do you do at school after you've got the fire started, before the children arrive?
Well, I tried to keep warm myself, first of all. You know, if there were any other lesson plans or anything I needed to get ready for the day, why, that's what I worked on. And before you know it, you know, the kids started drifting in, and if it was cold, they'd come inside, and if it was nice out, they'd play out of doors, of course, until the bell rang.
And tell me about the bell.
Most of them had the one with the rope, you know, you'd pull.
Is the bell on top of the building?
Mm-hmm. Like the one in the little red schoolhouse over
Okay.
here on First Street.
Okay. About the same, the blackboards and the slates and the books are about the same?
Yes.
Not much difference
Yes,
there?
not much different, not much improvement in any of that during those years.
Were there any supplies that you furnished as the teacher?
Some, but I'd usually get construction paper, which we use for art, you know, and other things that we needed for our art classes.
And you purchased
Yes,
that? And where would you go to get that?
lattice usually.
In Cedar Falls?
Yes, yeah. Well, I would buy them and they would, the board would
Oh,
reimburse me.
okay,
Yes.
all right. So even when you're clear in Butler County, you shop at Lattice and
Yes.
Cedar Falls?
Yes.
What,
Chalk, chalk for the chalkboard and the erasers and,
okay.
yeah, things like that.
What activities began the day once the students were at their seats?
Well, we'd have opening exercises like when I was a student, much like that. We called them opening exercises.
Can you think of anything about how you structured the day's lessons?
Yes, I know how I did it. We had a planning book, and that was given to us by the superintendent. I guess maybe there was a certain budget set aside, and each of the superintendents, or the superintendent anyway of Butler County, each of the schools would get one of those planning books. And you'd have to fill out each day the things that you were going to do. Whether it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday.
For 9 grades, if you have kindergarten?
Yes, but you didn't always have 9 grades, you know.
Oh, okay.
Because some of the grades didn't have any students in.
Can you think of any special things you did as you worked with the children?
I can't think of anything real special because you just did the daily things and tried to get through the different books that were assigned to us. See, there were just certain books we could use. So those were the ones that you had to take your lessons out of.
Did you have recitation bench?
Yes. Yeah.
What type of work did your students do while they were at their seats?
They would work on the assignments that had been given to them. And if not that, they'd help some of the younger students. Sometimes they were good students, they could go to the board and play a game, go to the blackboard, or get a book from our little teeny library.
Did you get books from the county superintendent?
I don't recall that we got books that we could check out there, no.
How did the day's experiences vary between the grade levels?
Well, I guess it depended what you were working on, whether it was math or whether it was geography. And of course, you didn't teach the little ones geography. You'd maybe touch on this or that, you know, related to it. But as such, no.
How many students were in your school? Schools, do you remember?
Overall, I think probably the most I had was 20 or 20-some.
Do you remember what the smallest number you would have had?
Probably 15.
Did the student population change over time much?
Yeah, it did. It changed. As people would move into the community or move out, or the children graduated and went on to high school. And some of them didn't go on to high school. They stayed home and help their parents on the farm.
You talked about the science activity where they collected the bark and the leaves for
Yes.
trees. Can you think of any other activities you had your students do?
You know, that one is so shines out in my memory. And I don't know, I just can't think of something else that we did. I'm sure we did, but, you know, it's been a long time ago.
What did you like? What did you enjoy teaching the most?
Probably history and
Because
geography, I think, is so neat.
so you'd say the subjects you enjoy are the ones you enjoy teaching the most.
Yes, yeah.
Were there any subjects you didn't enjoy teaching?
Science probably was the hardest. It should have been the easiest because it was right there.
Do you know why you didn't like it?
I don't know, because it was so kind of iffy. Weren't some real goals set up for it.
Did you ever have any helpers as a teacher?
No, I didn't, except my sister helped with some sweeping, I can remember. And I have two sisters, and they both were teachers too.
In rural schools?
And my youngest sister taught at the college level even, so she went up there.
Did your rules differ very much from as the ones you had as a student?
No, not a lot.
What techniques, discipline techniques did you use to enforce your rules?
No. I didn't like for the children to be whispering and disturbing others when they were trying to work. And they had to hold up their hands to get some help. And I think one finger to go to the outhouse. And I didn't like to be disturbed when I was having class. Probably should mention that usually had a book that I read a chapter out of every day, and the kids liked that. Always encourage reading, I think. Reading is so important, but you have to know how.
And did your students always bring their lunches?
Yes. Yes, they did.
Their lunchtime was a half hour too?
Yes.
Did your lunch change much from a student to a teacher?
Not a lot. Oh.
And what did your students do at recess time?
Well, they played games, and they played baseball. And if they were inside, they would play musical chairs, and they'd get a time of deciding which game they wanted to play too.
How is that decided?
Or would ask the kids what they thought they'd like to do, and one or two would make a suggestion, and they'd go along with it, you know.
Did you see your students outside of the school day?
Probably the only place I'd see them would be at church.
Did your students help you keep the classroom up?
Well, they were supposed to keep their desks neat and paper picked up off the floor. And that was the one thing we did before we were dismissed. Pick all the paper up off the floor, scraps and stuff. Might have fallen on the floor.
Do you have your eraser crew
And the
too?
eraser crew.
Do you have any help taking care of the schoolhouse?
No. And the one thing that was always kind of a problem was water.
Tell me about that.
Well, in Ripley too, we had our own well, and they all did, but this one pumped so hard. It was just awful. It almost took two people. But we'd get a pail of water in, and there was a dipper in it, you know, and I don't remember if we had cups or whether everybody drank out of the dipper. I think they did when I went to school. But, you know, for each one to have a cup and keep track of it, because they didn't have paper cups in those days. So there wasn't any thrown away. So if one had a cold, they'd all get it, you know.
Do you know of any of these three schools why the location was selected for the country school?
Well, I don't. I think it was set up by the state that every 2 miles would be a schoolhouse.
How would you say your school compared with the other schools at the time?
I'd say they were about all alike, except Union 4 and the one at Parkersburg. They had a furnace in the basement.
Do you remember anything about community politics influencing the operation of your schools?
Not really.
Any involvement with the parents or community in your school?
The only way through, if kids got in trouble, you'd call the parents, but I don't even recall very much of that. One of the parents told me if James gets in trouble in school, he's going to get in trouble at home. You know, so they were, most parents were real supportive.
Tell me about the role of the county superintendent.
Oh, she was a sweetheart. She was a big woman and always wore lipstick and would come and visit a couple times a year and look over your plans and the schoolhouse and the schoolyard and what you were doing. And like I said, she told this story about Black Sambo that I won't ever forget. Oh, she could tell stories, but that one is especially, remember that.
Do you remember what you got paid?
Yes. I got paid $50 a month.
The whole 6 years you taught?
It got a little more to the end.
Each year a little more?
Yes. I think in the end I was getting 75. But you know, that was a lot of money in those days.
Okay.
I could buy my own toothpaste, you know, and little clothes. And it felt so good to have just a little money.
Did you ever get any more schooling than your one semester or your summer at ISTC?
Not at ISTC, but I got my bachelor's degree later.
Later, but it was not here.
It was here.
It was here. Okay.
Yes.
At UNI, when
Mhm.
it was UNI, then
Yes.
you had your okay.
Yes.
But you weren't teaching then.
I wasn't teaching, but my son graduated from high school, and he went to school up here and was complaining about things, you know. And I said, well, Terry, I'm going to enroll in a couple classes. And if I can do it, you can do it too. And you know, I started and then I couldn't stop. I think it was 1975 when I got my degree, so it was a lot of years later. But
What was your favorite part of the day when you were teaching?
oh, I don't know, probably the children coming for their assignments and helping them when they had problems.
You said you had a bad memory. Can you think of a hard situation you faced as a classroom teacher?
Well, I had a situation at Union 4, and which irritated me an awful lot, and I called the superintendent. I wanted the Blackhawk County superintendent to come out, and, well, at least talk to me, you know. But he never showed. And that really frustrated me. So I had to work it out by myself, which I finally did.
Why did you choose to teach?
Well, at that time, there weren't a lot of choices that women had. And we were kind of poor people, it was one of the best things I could do at the time. And I remember I went to the bank in Kesley, and I borrowed $150. That put me through the summer. And I gradually paid it all back.
Do you have any idea how long it took you to pay that back?
I don't know. I know I don't like debt hanging over my head. I never did. And I got it paid back.
What did you have to do before you left the building at the end of the day?
Well, I had to get that floor swept. And correct papers, always correcting papers. And, you know, tests weren't ever made out. You always had to do your own. I'd make up tests, especially in history and geography, you know.
While you were teaching, what major events were going on in the world?
World War II.
Did that affect your life at the rural school?
Yeah, it did. Because it was so traumatic. So many traumatic things happened, you know. And old Hitler was such a terrible ruler, and what he did to the Jews.
Were there special events held at these schools? Were they ever used as polling places?
Just that there was church held in the Ripley school.
Was that a special denomination?
Evangelical. And I don't remember whether they gave the school board a little bit for meeting there of a Sunday. They might have. You know, I was kind of small at that time, and I didn't realize what was going on in that kind of thing.
You have shared so many wonderful things with me this afternoon. Anything else we should know?
Oh, I can't think of anything right now. I feel I got a good education in our rural schools because I had a good teacher, and she helped me so much. And you know, she died at Western Home. I found out later, this is a number of years ago, and I didn't know she was there. Otherwise, I surely would have gone to see her. But I think I only saw her a few times after I graduated from 8th grade. Don't remember seeing her a lot.
I guess there might be, when you've had the same teacher for years, you could have quite a special relationship. couldn't
Yes,
you?
yes. Yes, she was very good.
Thank you very much. I'm going to,
Whoops.
I'm going to switch this around because we don't see the, there, we got your Thanksgiving cactus in there. We got a good picture of that.
I'm kind of proud of that.
Well, you should be. It's gorgeous.